Yeah. I'm so sorry I started late. We're having some maintenance issues in the sub-basement. We had a burst pipe and some broken walling, so that's going to get fixed up right now from the awesome plumber dude. So if you hear any kind of clicking, clacking, banging, scraping, or loud noises behind me, that is getting fixed up really, really well. I have creator is going to be wandering around the basement too, so if you hear voices, just ignore them because we're getting everything fixed up. We're getting everything fixed up. Okay, hold on. I have to do the thing. I have to do a thing where, there we go. There we go. Dun, 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 dun. Dun. Does that work out for you guys? I hope that works out. I hope it's perfectly not too loud. I hope that's not super loud. Alright, awesome! Cool. Let's see. Ice! Hi! Thank you for being here! I'm having some maintenance done in the sub-basement. We had a burst pipe happen, so if you hear voices or noises in the background, that's just the plumber that creator hired to get everything fixed up, so that way the sub-basement doesn't leak. Because, I don't know about you, but I hate having my feet wet walking down. I hate having my feet wet when I'm walking down the hallway, and I'm usually barefoot when I'm at home, so it's fairly annoying. So yeah, we're just gonna be reading Howl's Moving Castle today. I'm just adjusting a few things. Got some maintenance issues that I had in the background that I had to take care of, so sorry for starting so late, but I'm happy that you could be here. So thank you for being here. Is the music alright? Is the music loud enough? Low enough? It's not too loud, is it? I want to just make sure that way everything is all fixed up. Bum, bum. How are you doing today? How are you doing today? How are you doing today? I am doing pretty well. I'm feeling much better than I was yesterday. I ended up getting a whole bunch of sleep, so I feel a million times better. Regan! Thank you for being here, Regan! The music's perfect? Great! I'm glad. But yeah, I was just explaining, I have a maintenance person coming in here to fix some stuff in the sub-basement because we got broken pipe and some broken walling, so if you hear voices or banging in the background, just know that's the thing that's happening. Cal's terrified he thinks you're stealing me from him. Never! You guys are my friends! I love being able to do everything with you guys together. If we could do a stream where all three of us could read together, that'd be bonkers. That would be bonkers. I would love that so much. Who's Cal? Cal is one of our other friends and mods. Calvin Frostel is a fellow VTuber who also frequents my streams. He's been a guest on my streams for a few times, and I'm hoping to get him back again on my stream soon so we can do some cool stuff. So we can do some more cool stuff. But of course, you know how it is when you're a VTuber, schedules get really busy and stuff like that. Of course, personal life stuff too. So, when I get the chance to get him back on again, I will. And you too, Regan, you need to come and join my stream again too. Just to hang out. You know what? I have a drawing stream this Friday. If you want to hang out, you're welcome to come. Because I normally don't do very much on my drawing streams except babble and draw, so it'd be nice to have some company. Alright, so last time we left off, we got turned into an old lady. We ended up living in Howl's Castle. He ended up having a whole tantrum where he produced a lot of gross, icky slime all over him. And we found out that he is trying to court our sister, which isn't cool. Which is not cool, but it is what it is. So let me just open the book back up again. And we'll get started. You guys ready? Alrighty. Chapter 7, in which a scarecrow prevents Sophie from leaving the castle. Only a particularly bad attack of aches and pains prevented Sophie from setting out for market chipping that evening. But the drizzle in Port Haven had gotten into her bones. She lay in her cubbyhole and ached and worried about Martha. It might not be so bad, she thought. She only had to tell Martha that the suitor she was not sure about was none other than Wizard Howl. That would scare Martha off, and she would tell Martha that the way to scare Howl off was to announce that she was in love with him, and then perhaps to threaten him with aunts. Yeah, Regan, you're more than welcome to join me. My Friday streams are usually, whenever I do a drawing stream, they're usually pretty quiet because I'm just sitting there concentrating on drawing and talking. So having an extra person there always makes it a little easier. So if you want to come join me, you and Cal both are more than welcome to come and join me on a stream if you want to just talk while I doodle. It's always so much fun having you guys on stream. Gonna look while I work on my... Yeah! Oh, I still have to work on my character, too. I haven't worked on my character yet either, so I'll have to do that soon. I struggle with working on character sheets, which is probably the only thing I don't like about D&D's, is working on character sheets, because me and numbers and thinking of character lore and stuff gives me a headache after a while. I'm a very simple person, so it's like, trying to think about all of that all at once kind of makes my one brain cell kind of go brr. So, we'll work on. I gotta work on mine later. I do know what I want. I do know what character I want to be. I want to be a bard again. I like being a bard. I don't know why I like being a bard, but I do. So I'm gonna be a bard. I think I'm gonna be a half-elf bard. I think that's what I want to be. You gonna play a wimpy rogue dude? You mean Cal? But yeah. So I think I'm gonna be a half-elf bard. That's what I'm planning on anyway. The details will follow later. Maybe later or in your time tomorrow. We can work on it together because I'm not the greatest at working on. I'm not the greatest on working on character sheets, so it'd be nice to have a little extra help. Yeah, I'll tell you about it later. But let me get back to the story, okay? You enjoy it. Catcore, welcome! Welcome to the reading stream. We are reading Howl's Moving Castle. Hi! Welcome! If you're not... Okay, Catcore, we're doing a reading stream today. If you're not into, like, reading streams, it's quite alright. You don't have to stay if it's not your thing. But Thursday we are doing the finale of Undertale, so if you want to come and tune in for that, that's perfectly okay. But I hope that you would stay. I hope that you would stay and enjoy the story. We are reading Howl's Moving Castle. It is a classic, and it has been made into a Ghibli movie, so it's a really fun read. So I hope you can come and enjoy it with us. Damn, just witnessed a live execution on screen. You remember, Regan, remember, I don't have chill sometimes. Sometimes I don't have any chill. But you know I have a lot of love for you and Cal, so it's all in good fun. It's all in good fun. It's all in good fun. Yay! So I hope you enjoy Catcore. I hope you enjoy the story. Let me get back to it now. I fell off track. Let me get back to it. Let's see. Sophie was still creaking when she got up next morning. Curse the witch of the waste, she muttered to her stick as she got it out, ready to leave. She could hear Howl singing in the bathroom, as if he had never had a tantrum in his life. She tiptoed to the door as fast as she could hobble. Howl, of course, came out of the bathroom before she reached it. Sophie looked at him sourly. He was all spruce and dashing, scented gently with apple blossom. The sunlight from the window dazzled off his gray and scarlet suit and made a faintly pink halo of his hair. I think my hair looks rather good in this color, he said. Do you indeed? Grumped Sophie. It goes well with this suit, said Howl. You have quite a touch with your needle, don't you? You've given the suit more style somehow. Ha! Said Sophie. Howl stopped with his hand on the knob above the door. Aches and pains troubling you, he said? Or has something annoyed you? Annoyed? Said Sophie. Why should I be annoyed? Someone only filled the castle with rotten aspic and deafened everyone in Port Haven and scared Calcifer to a cinder and broke a few hundred hearts. Why should that annoy me? Howl laughed. I apologize, he said, turning the knob red down. The king wants to see me today. I shall probably be kicking my heels in the palace until evening, but I can do something for your rheumatism when I get back. Don't forget to tell Michael that I left a spell for him on the bench. He smiled suddenly at Sophie and stepped out among the spires of Kingsbury. And you think that makes it all right? Sophie growled at the door as the door shut. But the smile had mollified her. If that smile works on me, Then it's no wonder poor Martha doesn't know her own mind, she muttered. I need another log before you go, Calcifer reminded her. Sophie hobbled to drop another log into the grate. She then set off to the door again. But here Michael came running downstairs and snatched the remains of a loaf off a bench as he ran to the door. You don't mind, do you? He said in an agitated way. I'll bring a fresh loaf when I come back. I've got something very urgent to see today, but I'll be back by evening. If the sea captain calls for his wind spell, it's on the end of the bench clearly labeled. He turned the knob green downward and jumped out onto the windy hillside, loaf clutched to his stomach. See you, he shouted, as the castle trudged away past him as the door slammed. Botheration, said Sophie. Calcifer, how does a person open the door when there's no one inside the castle? I'll open it for you. Or Michael. Hal does it himself, said Calcifer. So no one would be locked out when Sophie left. She was not all sure she would be coming back, but she did not intend to tell Calcifer. She gave Michael time to get well on his way to wherever he was going, and set off to the door again. This time Calcifer stopped her. If you're going to be a long way, he said, you mind leaving some logs where I can reach them? Can you pick up logs? Sophie asked, intrigued in spite of her impatience. For answer, Calcifer stretched out a blue arm-shaped flame, divided into green-like, finger-like flames at the end. It was not very long, nor did it look strong. See? I can almost reach the hearth, he said proudly. Sophie stacked a pile of logs in front of the grate so that Calcifer could at least reach the top one. You're not to burn them until you've got them in the grate, she warned him, and then set off to the door again. This time somebody knocked on it before she got there. It was one of those days, Sophie thought. It must be the sea captain. She put up her hand to turn the knob blue down. No, it's the castle door, Calcifer said, but I'm not sure. Then it was Michael back for some reason, Sophie thought as she opened the door. A turnip face leered at her. She smelled mildew. Against the wide blue sky, a ragged arm ending in the stump of a stick wheeled around and tried to paw at her. It was a scarecrow. It was only made of sticks and rags, but it was alive, and it was trying to come in. Calcifer! Sophie screamed. Make the castle go faster! The stone blocks around the doorway crunched and grated. The green-brown moorland was suddenly rushing past. The scarecrow's stick arm thumped on the door, and then went scraping along the wall of the castle as the castle left it behind. It wheeled its other arm around and seemed to try to clutch at the stonework. It meant to get into the castle if it could. Sophie slammed the door shut. This, she thought, just showed how stupid it was for an eldest child to try to seek her fortune. That was the scarecrow she had propped in the hedge on her way to the castle. She had to make jokes to it. Now, as if her jokes had brought it to evil life, it had followed her all the way here and tried to paw at her face. She ran to the window to see if the thing was still trying to get into the castle. Of course, all she could see was a sunny day in Port Haven, with a dozen sails going up a dozen masts beyond the roofs opposite, and a cloud of seagulls circling the blue sky. That's the difficulty of being in several places at once, Sophie said to the human skull on the bench. Then, all at once, she discovered the real drawback to being an old woman. Her heart gave a leap and a little stutter. Then it seemed to be trying to bang its way out of her chest. It hurt. She shook all over and her knees trembled. She rather thought she might be dying. It was all she could do to get to the chair by the hearth. She sat there, panting, clutching her chest. Is something the matter? Calcifer asked. Yes. My heart. There was a scarecrow at the door, Sophie gasped. What has a scarecrow got to do with your heart? Calcifer asked. It was trying to get in here. It gave me a terrible fright in my heart. But you wouldn't understand, you silly young demon, Sophie panted. You haven't got a heart. Yes, I have, Calcifer said, as proudly as he had revealed his arms. Down in the glowing part of the ember and the logs. And don't call me young. I'm a good million years older than you are. Can I reduce the speed of the castle now? Only if the scarecrow's gone, said Sophie. Has it? I can't tell, said Calcifer. It's not flesh and blood, you see. I told you I couldn't really see outside. Sophie got up and dragged herself to the door again, feeling ill. She opened it slowly and cautiously. Green steepness, rocks, and purple slopes were past, making her feel dizzy. But she took a grip on the doorframe and leaned out to look along the wall to the moorland and they were leaving behind. The scarecrow was about 50 yards to the rear. It was hopping from clump to heather clump with a sinister sort of valiance, holding its fluttering stick arms at an angle to balance it on a hillside. As Sophie watched, the castle left it further behind. It was slow, but it was still following. She shut the door. "It's still there," she said, "hopping after us. Go faster." But that upsets all my calculations," Calcifer explained. "I was aiming to circle the hills and get back to where Michael left us in time to pick him up this evening." "Then go twice as fast and circle the hills twice, as long as you leave that horrible thing behind," said Sophie. "What a fuss," Calcifer grumbled, but he could increase the castle's speed. Sophie could actually, for the first time, feel it rumbling around her as she sat huddled in her chair, wondering if she was dying. She did not want to die yet, before she had talked to Martha. As the day went on, everything in the castle began to jiggle with its speed. Bottles chinked. The skull clattered on the bench. Sophie could hear things falling off the shelves in the bathroom and splashing into the bath where Howl's blue and silver suit was still soaking. She began to feel a little better. She dragged herself to the door again and looked out. Her hair flying in the wind. The ground was streaking past underneath. The hills seemed to be spinning slowly as the castle sped across them. The grinding and rumbling nearly deafened her, and smoke was puffing out behind it in blasts, but the scarecrow was a tiny black dot on a distant slope by then. Next time she looked, it was out of sight entirely. "Good. Then I shall stop for the night," said Calcifer. "That was quite a strain." The rumbling died away. Things stopped jiggling. Calcifer went to sleep, in the way fires do, sinking among the logs until there were rosy cylinders plated with white ash, only a hint of blue and green deep underneath. Sophie felt quite spry again by then. She went and fished 6 packets and a bottle out of the slimy water in the bath. The packets were soaked. She did not dare leave them that way after yesterday, so she laid them on the floor and very cautiously sprinkled them with the stuff labeled drying powder. They were dried almost instantly. This was encouraging. Sophie let the water out of the tub and tried the powder on Howl's suit. That dried it too. It was still sting green and rather smaller than it had been, but it cheered Sophie up to find that she could put at least something right. She felt cheerful enough to busy herself getting supper. She bundled everything onto the bench in a heap around the skull on one end and began chopping onions. "At least your eyes don't water, my friend," she told the skull. "Count your blessings." The door sprang open. Sophie nearly cut herself in fright, thinking it was the scarecrow again. But it was Michael. He burst jubilantly in. He dumped a loaf, a pie, and a pink and white striped box on top of the onions. He then seized Sophie around her skinny waist and danced her around the room. "It's all right! It's all right!" he shouted joyfully. Sophie hopped and stumbled to keep out of the way of Michael's boots. "Steady! Steady!" she gasped, giddily trying to hold the knife where it would not cut either of them. "What is all right?" "Letty loves me," Michael shouted, dancing her almost to the bathroom and then almost to the hearth. "She's never even seen Hal. It was all a mistake." He spun them both around in the middle of the room. "Will you let me go before this knife cuts one of us?" Sophie squawked. "And perhaps explain a little." "Whoop!" Michael shouted. He whirled Sophie into the chair and dumped her into it, where she sat gasping. "Last night I wish you dyed his hair blue," he said. "I don't mind now. When Hal said Letty had her, even I thought of dyeing him blue myself. You can see the way he talks. I just knew he was going to drop this girl, just like all the others, as soon as he got her to love him. And when I thought it was my Letty, Anyway, he said there was another fellow, and I thought that was me, so I tore down a market chipping today, and it was all right. Hal must be after some other girl with the same name. Letty's never even seen him." Let me get this straight," Sophie said dizzily. "We're talking about the Letty Hatter who works in Cesari's bakery shop, are we not?" "Of course we are," Michael said jubilantly. "I love her ever since she started working there, and I almost couldn't believe it when she says she loves me. She has hundreds of admirers. I wouldn't have been surprised if Hal was one of them. I'm so relieved. I got you a cake from Cesari's to celebrate. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. He thrust the pink and white box at Sophie. Onions fell off it into her lap. How old are you, my child? She asked. 15 last May Day, said Michael. Calcifer set fireworks up from the castle. Didn't you, Calcifer? Oh, he's asleep. You're probably thinking I'm too young to be engaged. I've still got 3... Hello, Beans! Yes, my sweet girl. What do you need? What do you need? Come here. Come here, precious girl. Aw, you're so sweet. You just want pets? Come here. No, you want pet. You want to be pet. Beans is such a funny girl. She wants to be pet, but she wants to be pet in her specific spot. I can't pet you right now, Beans. I can't. She wants me to go to her spot and pet her, but that's like really far away from my computer screen, and it's like by another windowsill, so I can't really do that right now. Such a silly girl. You're probably thinking I'm too young to be engaged. I still got 3 years of my apprenticeship left to run, and Lady's got even longer. But we promised one another, and we don't mind waiting. Then Michael was about the right age for Martha, Sophie thought. And she knew by now he was a nice, steady lad with a career as a wizard ahead of him. Bless Martha's heart. When she thought back to that bewildering May Day, she realized that Michael had been the one of that shouting group leaning on the counter in front of Martha. But Hal had been outside in Market Square. Are you sure Letty was telling the truth about Hal? She asked anxiously. Positive, said Michael. I know when she's lying. She stops twiddling her thumbs. She does too, said Sophie, chuckling. How do you know? Michael asked in surprise. Because she's my sister's granddaughter, said Sophie. And as a small girl, she was not always terribly truthful. But she's quite young and suppose she changes as she grows. She, may not look quite the same in a year or so. Neither will I, said Michael. People our age change all the time. It won't worry us. She'll still be Letty. In a manner of speaking, Sophie thought. But suppose she was telling the truth, she went on anxiously, and she just knew Hal under a false name. Don't worry, I thought of that, said Michael. I described Hal. You must admit he's pretty recognizable. And she really hadn't seen him or his wretched guitar. I didn't even have to tell her. She doesn't know how to play the thing. She never set eyes on him, and she twiddled her thumbs all the time, as she said she hadn't. That's a relief, Sophie said, lying stiffly back in her chair. And it certainly was a relief about Martha. But it was not much of a relief, because Sophie was positive that the only other Letty Hatter in the district was the real one. If there had been another, someone would have come into the hat shop and gossiped about it. It sounded like strong-minded Letty, not giving in to Hal. What worried Sophie was that Letty had told Hal her real name. She might not be sure about him, but she liked him enough to trust him with an important secret like that. Don't look so anxious, Michael laughed, leaning on the back of the chair. Have a look at the cake I brought you. As Sophie started opening the box, it dawned on her that Michael had gone from seeing her as a natural disaster to actually liking her. She was so pleased and grateful that she decided to tell Michael the whole truth about Letty and Martha and herself too. It was only fair to let him know the sort of family we've meant to marry into. The box came open. It was Cesari's most luscious cake, covered in cream and cherries and little curls of chocolate. Oh, said Sophie. The square knob over the door clicked around to red blob down of its own accord, and Hal came in. What a marvelous cake. My favorite kind, he said. Where did you get it? I called in at Cesari's, Michael said in a sheepish, self-conscious way. Sophie looked up at Hal. Something was always going to interrupt her when she decided to say she was under a spell. Even a wizard, it seems. It looks worth the walk, Hal said, inspecting the cake. I've heard Cesari's is better than any of the cake shops in Kingsbury. Stupid of me to never have been to the place. Is that a pie I see on the bench? He went over to look. Pie and a bed of raw onions. Human skull looking put upon. He picked up the skull and knocked an onion ring out of its eye socket. I see Sophie has been busy again. Couldn't you have restrained her, my friend? The skull yattered its teeth at him. Hal looked startled as he put it down rather hastily. Is something the matter? Michael asked. He seemed to know the signs. There is, said Howl. I shall have to find someone to blacken my name to the king. Was there something wrong with the wagon spell? Said Michael. No, it worked perfectly. That's the trouble, Hal said, restless, twiddling an onion ring on one finger. The king's trying to pin me down to do something else now. Calcifer, if we're not very careful, he's going to appoint me royal magician. Calcifer did not answer. Hal rolled back to the fireside and realized Calcifer was asleep. Wake him up, Michael, he said. I need to consult him. Michael threw 2 logs onto the Calcifer and called him. Nothing happened apart from the thin spire of smoke. Calcifer! Hal shouted. That did no good either. Hal gave Michael a mystified look and picked up the poker, which was something Sophie had never seen him do before. Sorry, Calcifer, he said, jabbing under the unburnt logs. Wake up! One thick black cloud of smoke rolled up and stopped. Go away. Go away! Calcifer grunted. I'm tired. At this, Hal looked thoroughly alarmed. What's wrong with him? I have never known him to be like this before. I think it was the scarecrow, Sophie said. Hal swiveled round on his knees and leveled his glass marble eyes at her. What have you done now? He went on staring while Sophie explained. A scarecrow, he said. Calcifer agreed to speed up the castle because of a scarecrow? Dear Sophie, do please tell me how you bully a fire demon into being that obliging. I'd dearly love to know. I didn't bully him, said Sophie. It gave me a turn, and he was sorry for me. It gave her a turn, and Calcifer was sorry for her, Hal repeated. My good Sophie, Calcifer is never sorry for anyone. Anyway, I hope you enjoy raw onions and cold pie for your supper, because you almost put Calcifer out. There's the cake, Michael said, trying to make peace. The food did seem to improve Hal's temper, although he kept casting anxious looks at the unburned logs in the hearth all the time that they were eating. The pie was good cold, and the onions were quite tasty when Sophie had soaked them in vinegar. The cake was superb. While they were eating, Michael risked asking Hal what the king had wanted. Nothing definite yet, Hal said gloomily, but he was sounding me out about his brother quite ominously. Apparently they had a good old argument before Prince Justin stormed off, and people were talking. The king obviously wanted me to volunteer to look for his brother, and like a fool I went and said I didn't think Wizard Solomon was dead, and that made matters worse. Why do you want to slither out of looking for the prince? Sophie demanded. Don't you think you can find him? Rude as well as a bully, aren't you? Hal said. He still hadn't forgiven her about Calcifer. I want to get out of it because I know I can find him, if you must know. Justin was great buddies with Solomon, and the argument was because he told the king that he was going to look for him. He didn't think the king should have sent Solomon to the waste in the first place. Now, even you must know that there's a certain lady in the waste who is very bad news. She promised to fry me alive last year, and she sent a curse out after me that I've only avoided so far because I had the sense to give her a false name. Sophie was almost awed. You mean you jilted the witch of the waste? Hal cut himself another lump of cake, looking sad and honorable. That is not the way to put it. I admit I thought I was fond of her for a while. She is in some ways a very sad lady, very unloved. Every man in Ingary is scared stiff of her. You ought to know how that feels, Sophie dear. Sophie's mouth opened in utter indignation. Michael said quickly, Do you think we should move the castle? That's why you invented it, wasn't it? That depends on Calcifer. Hal looked over his shoulder at the barely smoking logs again. I must say, if I think of the king and the witch both after me, I get a craving for planting the castle on a nice frowning rock 1,000 miles away. Michael obviously wished he had not spoken. Sophie could see that he was thinking that 1,000 miles was a terribly long way from Martha. But what happens to your Lady Hatter, she said to Hal, if you up and move? I expect that will be all over by then, Hal said absently. But if I could only think of a way to get the king off my back. I know! He lifted his fork with a melting hunk of cream and cake on it and pointed at Sophie. You can blacken my name to the king. You can pretend to be my old mother and plead for your blue-eyed boy." He gave Sophie the smile which had no doubt charmed the Witch of the Waste and possibly Letty too, firing it along with the fork across the cream straight into Sophie's eyes, dazzlingly. "If you can bully Calcifer, the king should give you no trouble at all." Sophie stared through the dazzle and said nothing. This, she thought, was where she slithered out. She was leaving. It was too bad about Calcifer's contract. She had enough of Howl. First green slime, then glaring at her for something Calcifer had done quite freely. Now this? Tomorrow she would slip off to upper folding and tell Letty all about it. Chapter 8, in which Sophie leaves the castle in several directions at once. To Sophie's relief, Calcifer blazed up bright and cheerful the next morning. If she had not had enough of Howl, she would have been almost touched by how glad Howl was to see Calcifer. "I thought she'd done you in for, you old ball of gas," Howl said, kneeling at the hearth with his sleeves trailing in the ash. "I was only tired," Calcifer said. "There was some kind of drag on the castle. I'd never taken it that fast before." "Well, don't let her make you do it again," said Howl. He stood up, gracefully brushing ash off his gray and scarlet suit. "Make a start on that spell today, Michael, and if anyone comes from the king, I'm on an urgent private business until tomorrow. I'm going to see Letty, but you needn't tell him that." He picked up his guitar and opened the door with the knob green down onto the wide cloudy hills. The scarecrow was there again. When Howl opened the door, it pitched sideways across him with his turned face into his chest. The guitar uttered an awful twang sound. Sophie gave a faint squawk of terror and hung onto the chair. One of the scarecrow's stick arms was scraping stiffly around to get a purchase on the door. From the way Howl's feet were braced, it was clear he was being shoved quite hard. There was no doubt that the thing was determined to get into the castle. Calcifer's blue face leaned out of the grate. Michael stood in shock still beyond. "There really is a scarecrow," they both said. "Oh, is there? Do tell!" Howl panted. He got one foot up against the doorframe and heaved. The scarecrow flew lumpishly away backwards, to land with a light rustle in the heather some yards off. It sprang up instantly and came hopping towards the castle again. Hal hurriedly laid the guitar on the doorstep and jumped down to meet it. "No, you don't, my friend," he said with one hand out. "Go back to where you came from." He walked forward slowly with his hand still out. The scarecrow retreated a little, hopping slowly and wearily backwards. When Hal stopped, the scarecrow stopped too, with its one leg planted in the heather and its raggedy arms tilting this way and that like a person sparring for an opening. The rags fluttering on its arms seemed a mad imitation of Hal's sleeves. "So you won't go," Hal said, and the turnip head slowly moved side to side. "No." "I'm afraid you'll have to," said Hal. "You scare Sophie, and there's no knowing what she'll do when she's scared. Come to think of it, you scare me too." Hal's arms moved, heavily, as if he was lifting a large weight, until they were raised high above his head. He shouted a strange word, which was half hidden in a crack of sudden thunder, and the scarecrow went soaring away. Up and backwards it went, rags fluttering, arms wheeling in protest, up and out, and on, until it was a soaring speck in the sky, and then a vanishing point in the clouds, and then not to be seen at all. Hal lowered his arms and came back into the doorway, mopping his face with the back of his hand. "I take back my hard words, Sophie," he said, panting. "That thing was alarming. It may have been dragging the castle back all day yesterday. It has some of the strongest magic I've met. Whatever it was, all that was left of the last person you cleaned for?" Sophie gave a weak little cackle of laughter. Her heart was behaving badly again. Hal realized something was wrong with her. He jumped indoors across his guitar, took hold of her elbow, and sat her in the chair. "Take it easy now." Something happened between Hal and Calcifer then. Sophie felt it, because she was being held by Hal, and Calcifer was leaning out of the grate. Whatever it was, her heart began to behave properly almost at once. Hal looked at Calcifer, shrugged, and then turned away to give Michael a whole lot of instructions about making Sophie keep quiet for the rest of the day. Then he picked up the guitar and left at last. Sophie lay in the chair and pretended to feel twice as ill as she did. She had to let Hal get out of sight. Excuse me. It was a nuisance he was going to upper folding as well. But she would walk so much more slowly that she would arrive around the time he started back. The important thing was not to meet him on the way. She watched Michael slyly while he spread out the spell and scratched his head over. She waited until he dragged big leather books off the shelves and began making notes in a frantic, depressed sort of way. When he seemed properly absorbed, Sophie muttered several times, "Stuffy in here." Michael took no notice. "Terribly stuffy," Sophie said, getting up and shambling to the door. "Fresh air." She opened the door and climbed out. Calcifer obligingly stopped the castle dead while she did. Sophie landed into the heather and took a look around to get her bearings. The road over the hills to Upper Folding was a sandy line through the heather just downhill from the castle. Naturally, Calcifer would not make things inconvenient for Howl. Sophie set off towards it. She felt a little sad. She was going to miss Michael and Calcifer. She was almost at the road when there was shouting behind her. Michael came bounding down the hillside after her, and the tall black castle came bobbling along behind him, shedding anxious puffs of smoke from all four turrets. "What are you doing?" Michael said when he caught up. From the way he looked at her, Sophie could see he thought of the scarecrow had sent her wrong in the head. "I'm perfectly all right," said Sophie indignantly. "I'm simply going to see my other sister's granddaughter. She's called Letty Hatter, too. Now do you understand?" "Where does she live?" Michael demanded, as if he thought Sophie might not know. "Upper Folding," she said. "But that's over 10 miles away," said Michael. "I promised Hal I'd make you rest. I can't let you go. I told him I wouldn't let you out of my sight." Sophie did not look very kindly on this. Hal thought she was useful now because he wanted her to see the king. Of course he did not want her to leave the castle. "Ah," she said. "Besides," said Michael, slowly grasping the situation, "Hal must have gone up to Upper Folding too." "I'm quite sure he has," said Sophie. "Then you're anxious about this girl, if she's your great niece," Michael said, arriving at the point at last. "I see, but I can't let you go." "I'm going," said Sophie. "But if Hal sees you there, he'll be furious," Michael went on, working things out. "Because I promised him. He'll be mad with both of us. You ought to get rest." Sorry. Excuse me. I'm having a little bit of an allergic reaction to some dust. Okay. Sorry, needed to hydrate. Then, when Sophie was almost ready to hit him, he exclaimed, "Wait! There's a pair of 7-league boots in the broom cupboard." He took Sophie by her skinny old wrist and towed her uphill to the waiting castle. She was forced to give little hops in order not to catch her feet in the heather. "But," she panted, 7 leagues is 21 miles. I'd be halfway to Port Haven in 2 strides." "No, it's 10.5 miles a step," said Michael. "That makes Upper Folding almost exactly. If we each take 1 boot and go together, then I won't be letting you out of my sight, and you won't be doing anything strenuous. And we'll get there before Hal does, so you won't even know where we've been. That solves our problems beautifully." Michael was so pleased with himself that Sophie did not have the heart to protest. She shrugged and supposed Michael had better find out about the 2 Lettys before they changed looks again. It was more honest this way. But when Michael fetched the boots from the broom cupboard, Sophie began to have doubts. Oh gosh, okay. Oh, one moment. Having a little bit of an issue. Having a little bit of a technical issue. There we go. Okay. This should be fine. Up until now, she thought there were 2 leather buckets that had somehow lost their handles and got a little squashed. "You're supposed to put your foot in them, shoe and all," Michael explained as he carried the 2 heavy bucket-shaped things to the door. "These are the prototypes of the boots Hal made for the king's army. We managed to get the latter ones a bit lighter and more boot-shaped." He and Sophie sat on the doorstep and each put 1 foot in a boot. "Put yourself to Upper Folding before you put the boot down," Michael warned her. He and Sophie stood up on the foot in which was an ordinary shoe and carefully swung themselves around to face Upper Folding. "Now tread," said Michael. Zip! The landscape instantly rushed past them, so fast that it was only a blur, a gray-green blur for the land, and a blue-gray blur for the sky. The wind of their going tore at Sophie's hair and dragged every wrinkle in her face backwards until she thought she would arrive with half her face behind her ear. The rushing stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Everything was calm and sunny. They were knee-deep in buttercups in the middle of Upper Folding Village Common. A cow nearby stared at them. Beyond it, thatched cottages drowsed under the trees. Unfortunately, the bucket-like boot was so heavy that Sophie staggered as she landed. "Don't put that foot down!" Michael yelled, too late. There was another zipping blur and more rushing wind. When it stopped, Sophie found herself right down to the folding valley, almost into marsh folding. "Oh, drat!" she said, and hopped up carefully around on her shoe and tried again. Zip! Blur! And she was back on upper folding green again. Staggering forward with the weight of the boot, she had a glimpse of Michael diving to catch her. Zip! Blur! Oh, bother! Wailed Sophie. She was up in the hills again. The crooked black shape of the castle was drifting peacefully nearby. Calcifer was amusing himself by blowing black smoke rings from one turret. Sophie saw that much before her shoe caught into the heather, and she stumbled forward again. Zip! Zip! This time Sophie visited in rapid succession the market square of Market Chipping and the front wall of a very grand mansion. Blow! Blow! She cried. Drat! One word for each place. And then she was off again with her own momentum and another zip! Right down on the end of the valley in the field somewhere. A large red bull raised its ring nose from the grass and thoughtfully lowered its horns. "I'm just leaving, my good beast," Sophie cried, hopping herself around frantically. Zip! Back to the mansion. Zip! To Market Square. Zip! And there was the castle yet again. She was getting the hang of it. Zip! Here was Upper Folding. But how do you stop? Zip! Oh, confound it! Sophie cried, almost in marsh folding again. This time she hopped around very carefully and trotted with great deliberation. Zip! And fortunately the boot landed in a cowpat, as she sat down with a thump. Michael sprinted up before Sophie could move and dragged the boot off her foot. "Thank you!" Sophie cried breathlessly. "There seemed no reason why I should ever stop." Sophie's heart pounded a bit as they walked around the commons to Mrs. Fairfax's house, but only in the way hearts do when you've done a lot rather quickly. She felt very grateful for whatever Howl and Calcifer had done. "Nice place," Michael remarked as he hid the boot in Mrs. Fairfax's hedge. Sophie agreed. The house was the biggest in the village. It was thatched, with white walls between the black beams, and, as Sophie remembered from visits as a child, you walk up to the porch through a garden crowded with flowers and humming with bees. Over the porch, a honeysuckle and a white climbing rose were competing as to which could give the most work to the bees. It was a perfect hot summer morning down here in Upper Folding. Mrs. Fairfax answered the door herself. She was one of those plump, comfortable ladies with swathes of butter-colored hair coiled around her head, who made you feel good with life just to look at her. Sophie felt the tiniest bit envious of Letty. Mrs. Fairfax looked from Sophie to Michael. She had seen Sophie last year ago as a girl of 17, and there was no reason for her to recognize her as an old woman of 90. "Good morning to you," she said politely. Sophie sighed. Michael said, "This is Letty Hatter's great aunt. I brought her here to see Letty." "Oh, I thought that face looked familiar," Mrs. Fairfax exclaimed. "There's quite a family resemblance. Do come in. Letty's a little busy just now, but have some scones and honey while you wait." She opened the door wider. Instantly, a large collie dog squeezed past Mrs. Fairfax's skirt, barging between Sophie and Michael, and ran across the nearest flower bed, snapping off flowers left and right. "Oh, stop him!" Mrs. Fairfax gasped, flying in pursuit. "I don't want him out just now." There was a minute or so of helter-skelter chase, in which the dog ran hither and thither, whining in a disturbed way, and Mrs. Fairfax and Sophie ran after the dog, jumping flower beds and getting into one another's way, and Michael ran after Sophie, crying, "Stop! You'll make yourself ill!" Then the dog set off loping around one corner of the house. Michael realized that the way to stop Sophie was to stop the dog. He made a crosswise dash to the flower bed, plunged around the house after the dog, and seized it by 2 handfuls of his thick coat, just as it reached the orchard at the back. Sophie hobbled up to find Michael pulling the dog away backwards and making such a strange face at her that she thought at first he was ill. but he jerked his head so often towards the orchard that she realized he was trying to tell her something. She stuck her face around the corner of the house, expecting to see a swarm of bees. Howl was there with Letty. They were in a grove of mossy apple trees in full bloom, with a row of beehives in the distance. Letty sat in a white garden seat. Howl was kneeling on one knee in the grass at her feet, holding one of her hands and looking noble and ardent. Letty was smiling lovingly at him. But the worst of it, as far as Sophie was concerned, was that Letty did not look like Martha at all. She was her own extremely beautiful self. She was wearing a dress of the same kind of pinks and whites as the crowded apple blossoms overhead. Her dark hair trailed in glossy curls over one shoulder, and her eyes shone with devotion for Howl. Sophie brought her head back around the corner and looked with dismay at Michael, holding the whining collie dog. He must have had a speech spell with him, Michael whispered, equally dismayed. Mrs. Fairfax caught them up, panting and trying to pin a loose curl back to her buttery hair back. "Bad dog," she said with a fierce whisper to the collie. "I'll put a spell on you if you do that once more." The dog blinked and crouched down. Mrs. Fairfax pointed a stern finger. "Into the house! Stay in the house!" The collie shook himself free of Michael's hands and slunk around the house again. "Thank you so much," Mrs. Fairfax said to Michael as they all followed it. "He will keep trying to bite Letty's visitor." "Inside!" she shouted sturdily in the front garden, as the collie seems to be thinking of going around the house and getting into the orchard another way. The dog gave her a woeful look over his shoulder and crawled dismally excuse me. The dog gave her a woeful look over its shoulder and crawled dismally indoors through the porch. That dog may have the right idea," Sophie said. "Mrs. Fairfax, do you know who Letty's visitor is?" Mrs. Fairfax chuckled. "The wizard Pendragon, or Howl, or whatever he calls himself," she said. "But Letty and I don't let on we know. It amused me when he first turned up calling himself Sylvester Oak, because I could see he had forgotten about me. Though I hadn't forgotten him, even though his hair used to be black in his student days." Mrs. Fairfax by now had her hands folded in front of her and was standing bolt upright, prepared to talk all day, as Sophie had often seen her do before. "He was my old tutor's very last pupil, you know, before she retired. When Mr. Fairfax was alive, he used to like me to transport both of us to Kingsbury to see a show from time to time. I can manage too very nicely if I take it slowly, and I always used to drop in on old Miss Penstemons when I was there. She liked her old pupils to keep in touch, and one time she was introducing this young Howl to us. Oh, she was proud of him. She taught Mrs. Sullivan too, you know, and she says Howl was twice as good." "But don't you know the reputation Howl has?" Michael interrupted. Getting into Mrs. Fairfax's conversations was rather like getting into a turning skipping rope. You had to choose the exact moment, but once you were in, you were in. Mrs. Fairfax turned herself slightly to face Michael. "Most of it is just talk, to my mind," she said. Michael opened his mouth to say that it was not, but he was in the skipping rope then, and it went on turning. "And as I said to Letty, here's your chance, my love. I know Hal could teach you 20 times more than I could. For I don't mind telling you, Letty's brains go way beyond mine, and she could end up in the same league as the Witch of the Waste, only in a good way. Letty's a good girl, and I'm fond of her. If Mrs. Penstemon was still teaching, I'd have Letty to her tomorrow. But she isn't, so I said, Letty, here's Wizard Hal courting you, and you could do worse than falling in love with him yourself, and let him be your teacher. The pair of you will go far. I don't think Letty was too keen on the idea at first, but she's been softening lately, and today it seems to be going beautifully." Here Mrs. Fairfax paused to beam benevolently at Michael, and Sophie dashed into the skipping rope for her turn. "But someone told me Letty was fond of someone else," she said. "Sorry for him, you mean," said Mrs. Fairfax. She lowered her voice. "There's a terrible disability here," she whispered suggestively, "and it's asking too much of any girl. I told him so. I'm sorry for him myself." Sophie managed a mystified, "Oh?" But it's a fearsomely strong spell. It's very sad," Mrs. Fairfax went on. "I had to tell him that there was no way someone of my abilities can break anything that's put on by the Witch of the Waste. Hal might, but of course he can't axe Hal, can he?" Here Michael, who kept looking nervously to the corner of the house in case Hal came around it and discovered them, managed to trample through the skipping rope and stopping it by saying, "I think we'd better be going." "Are you sure you won't come in for a taste of my honey?" asked Miss Fairfax. "I use it in nearly all my spells, you know." And she was off again, this time about the magical properties of honey. Michael and Sophie walked purposely down the path to the gate, and Mrs. Fairfax drifted behind them, talking away and sorrowfully straightening the plants the dog had bent as she talked. Sophie, meanwhile, racked her brains for a way to find out how Mrs. Fairfax knew Letty was Letty, without upsetting Michael. Mrs. Fairfax paused to gasp a bit as she heaved a large lupine upright. Sophie took the plunge. "Mrs. Fairfax, wasn't it my niece Martha who was supposed to come to you?" "Naughty girls," said Mrs. Fairfax, smiling and shaking her head as she emerged from the lupine. "As if I wouldn't recognize one of my own honey-based spells. But I said to her at the time, I'm not one to keep anyone against their will, and I'd always rather teach someone who wants to learn. Only, I said to her, I'll have no pretenses here. You either stay as your own self or not at all. And it's worked out very happily, as you see. Are you sure you won't stay and ask her yourself?" "I think we better go." Ayo, man, I'm gonna lurk while I fall asleep. Of course! Have a good night, Regan! Have a good night, and I hope you're enjoying the story. I hope you're enjoying the story very much. Alright, have a good night and sweet dreams. Let's see, I think we better go, said Sophie. "We have to get back," Michael added, with another nervous look towards the orchard. He collected the 7 boots from the hedge and set one down outside the gate for Sophie. "And I'm going to hold on to you this time," he said. Mrs. Fairfax leaned over the gate while Sophie inserted her foot into the boots. 7 leaguers, she said. "Would you believe I've not seen any of those for years? Very useful things for someone your age, Mrs. I wouldn't mind a pair myself these days. So it's you Letty inherits her witchcraft from, is it? Not that it necessarily runs in the families, but as often as not." Michael took hold of Sophie's arms and pulled. Both boots came down as the rest of Mrs. Fairfax's talk vanished from the zip and rush of air. Yes, we'll have to watch the movie sometime if I can get it to work. Because you know how the internet is. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Next moment, Michael had to brace his feet in order not to collide with the castle. The door was open. Inside, Calcifer was roaring. "Port Haven door! Someone's been banging on it ever since you left." Chapter 9, in which Michael has trouble with a spell. It was the sea captain at the door, coming for his wind spell at last. Yes, coming for his wind spell at last, and not at all pleased at having to wait. "If I miss my tide, boy," he said to Michael, "I shall have a word with the sorcerer about you. I don't like lazy boys." Michael, in Sophie's opinion, was far too polite to him, but she was feeling too dejected to interfere. When the captain had gone, Michael went to the bench to frown over his spell again, and Sophie sat silently mending her stockings. She had only the one pair, her knobby feet had worn huge holes in them. Her grey dress by this time was frayed and dirty. She wondered whether she dare cut the least stained bits of HOWL'S ruined blue and silver suit to make herself a new skirt with, but she did not quite dare. "Sophie," Michael said, looking up from his 11th page of notes, "how many nieces do you have?" Sophie had been afraid Michael would start asking questions. "When you get to my age, my lad," she said, "you lose count. They all look so alike. Those 2 Lettys could be twins in my mind." "Oh, not really," Michael said to her surprise. "The niece in upper folding isn't as pretty as my Letty." He tore up the 11th page and made a 12th. "I'm glad Hal didn't meet my Letty," he said. He began on his 13th page and tore that up too. "I wanted to laugh when Mrs. Fairfax said that she knew who Hal was. Didn't you?" "No," said Sophie. It had made no difference to Letty's feelings. She thought of Letty's bright, adoring face under that apple blossom. I suppose there's no chance, she said hopelessly, "that Hal could properly be in love this time." Calcifer snorted, green sparks up the chimney. "I was afraid you'd start thinking that," Michael said. But you'd be deceiving yourself, just like Mrs. Fairfax." "How do you know?" Calcifer and Michael exchanged glances. Did he forget to spend at least an hour in the bathroom this morning? Said Michael. He was in there for 2 hours, said Calcifer, putting spells on his face, vain fool. There you are then, said Michael. The day Hal forgets to do that will be the day I believe he's really in love, and not before. Sophie thought of Hal on one knee in the orchard, posing to look as handsome as possible, and she knew they were right. She thought of going to the bathroom and tipping all of Hal's beauty spells down the toilet, but she did not quite dare. Instead, she hobbled up and fetched the blue and silver soup, where she spent the rest of the day cutting little blue triangles out of it in order to make a patchwork sort of skirt. Michael patted her shoulder kindly as he came to throw all 17 pages of his notes onto Calcifer. Everyone gets over things in the end, you know, he said. By this time it was clear Michael was having trouble with his spell. He gave up the notes and scraped some soot off the chimney. Calcifer craned around to watch him in a mystified way. Michael took a withered root from one of the bags hanging out on the beams and put it in the soot. Then after much thought, he turned the doorknob blue side down and vanished for 20 minutes into Port Haven. He came back with a large hoarded seashell and put that with the root in the soot. After that, he tore pages and pages of paper and put those in too. He put the lot in front of the human skull and stood blowing on it, so the soot and bits of paper whirled all over the bench. What's he doing, do you think? Calcifer asked Sophie. Michael gave up blowing and started mashing everything, paper and all, with a pestle and mortar, looking at the skull expectantly from time to time. Nothing happened, so he just tried different ingredients from bags and jars. I feel bad about spying on Hal, he announced as he pounded a third set of ingredients to death in a bowl. He may be fickle to females, but he's been awfully good to me. He took me in when I was just an unwanted orphan sitting on his doorstep in Port Haven. How did that come about? Sophie asked, as she sniffed at another blue triangle. My mother died, and my father got drowned in the storm, Michael said, and nobody wants you when that happens. I had to leave our house because I couldn't pay rent, and I tried to live in the streets, but people kept turning me off doorsteps and out of boats until the only place I could think of was to go somewhere everyone was too scared to interfere with. Hal had just started up a small way as Sorcerer Jenkins then. But everyone said his house had devils in it, so I slept on his doorstep for a couple of nights until Hal opened the door one morning on his way to buy bread and I fell inside. So he said I could wait indoors while he got something to eat. I went in and there was Calcifer. And I started talking to him because I'd never met a demon before. Justice! Hi! Thank you for being here! Thank you for being here, my friend. I hope you're enjoying the story. Thank you for being here. What did you talk about? Said Sophie, wondering if Calcifer had asked Michael to break his contract too. He told me his troubles and dripped on me. Didn't you? Said Calcifer. It didn't seem to occur to him that I might have troubles as well. I don't think you have. You just grumble a lot, said Michael. You were quite nice to me that morning, and I think Hal was impressed. But you know how he is. He didn't tell me I could stay. He just didn't tell me to go. So I started being useful wherever I could, like looking after money, so that he didn't spend it all as soon as he got it, and so on. The spell gave a sort of woof, and then exploded mildly. Michael brushed soot off the skull, sighing, and tried new ingredients. Sophie began making a patchwork of blue triangles around her feet on the floor. I did make lots of stupid mistakes when I first started, he went on. Hal was awfully nice about it. I thought I'd get over that by now. And I think I do help with money. Hal buys such expensive clothing. Excuse me. He says no one's going to employ a wizard who looks as if he can't make money at the trade. That's just because he likes clothes, said Calcifer. His orange eyes watched Sophie at work rather meaningly. The suit was spoiled, Sophie said. It isn't just clothes, Michael said. Remember last winter when we were down to your last log, and Hal went off and bought that skull and that stupid guitar? I was really annoyed with him. He said they looked good. What did you do about logs? Sophie asked. Hal conjured some from someone who owed him money, Michael said. At least that's what he said that. At least he said they did, and I just hoped he was telling the truth. We ate seaweed. Hal said it's good for you. Nice stuff, murmured Calcifer, dry and crackly. I hate it, said Michael, staring abstractedly at his bowl of pounded stuff. I don't know. There should be 7 ingredients. Unless it's 7 processes. Let's try that in a pentacle anyway. He put the bowl on the floor and chalked a sort of 5-pointed star shape around it. The powder exploded with a force that blew Sophie's triangles into the hearth. Michael swore and hurriedly rubbed out the chalk marks. "Sophie," he said, "I'm stuck in this spell. You don't think you could possibly help me, do you?" Just like someone bringing up their homework to their granny, Sophie thought, collecting the triangles and patiently laying them out again. "Let's have a look," she said cautiously. "I don't know anything about magic, you know." Michael eagerly thrusted a strange, slightly shiny paper into her hand. It looked unusual, even for a spell. It was printed in bold letters, but it was slightly gray and blurred, and there were gray blurs like retreating storm clouds around the edges. "See what you think," said Michael. Sophie read, "Go and catch a falling star. Get with child a mandrake root. Tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear the mermaid singing, or to keep off envy's stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. Decide what this is about. Write a second verse yourself." It puzzled Sophie exceedingly. It was not quite like any of the spells she had snooped at before. She plowed through it twice, not really helped by Michael's eagerly explaining as she tried to read. You know Hal told me that the advanced spells have a puzzle in them? Well, I decided at first that every line was meant to be a puzzle. I used root with sparks in it for the falling star and seashell for the mermaid singing, and I thought I might count as a child, so I got a mandrake root down, and I wrote out lists of past years from the almanacs, but I wasn't sure about that. Maybe that's where I went wrong. And could the thing that stopped stinging be a dock leaf? I hadn't thought about that before. Anyway, none of it works. "I'm not surprised," said Sophie. "It looks to me like a set of impossible things to do." Michael was not having that. If the things were impossible, he pointed out reasonably, no one would ever be able to do the spell. "And," he added, "I'm so ashamed of spying on Hal that I want to make up for it by getting the spell right." "Very well," said Sophie. "Let's start with decide what this is about. That'll start things moving. If deciding the part of the spell, anyway." But Michael was not having that either. "No," he said. "It's the sort of spell that reveals itself as you do it. That's what the last line means. When you write the second half, saying what the spell means, that makes it work. Those kinds are the very advanced. We will have to crack the first bit first." Sophie collected her blue triangles into a pile again. "Let's ask Calcifer," she suggested. "Calcifer who?" But this was yet another thing Michael did not let her do. "No, be quiet. I think Calcifer is part of the spell. Look at the way it says 'tell me' and 'teach me.' I thought at first it meant 'teach the skull,' but that didn't work, so it must be Calcifer." "You can do it by yourself if you sit on everything I have to say," Sophie said. "Anyway, surely Calcifer must know who cleft his own foot." Calcifer flared up a little at this. "I haven't got any feet. I'm a demon, not a devil." Saying which, he retreated right under his logs where he could be heard chinking about, muttering lots of nonsense. All the rest of the time Sophie and Michael were discussing the spell. But this time the puzzle had gotten a grip on Sophie. She packed away her blue triangles, fetched the pen and paper, and started making notes in the same sort of quantities that Michael had. For the rest of the day she and Michael sat staring into the distance, nibbling quills and throwing suggestions out at one another. An average page of Sophie's notes read, "Does garlic keep off envy? I could cut out a star of paper and drop it. Could we tell it to Hal? Hal would like mermaids better than Calcifer. Do not think Hal's mind's honest. Is Calcifer's? Where are past years anyway? Does it mean one of those dry roots must bear fruit? Plant it next to a dock leaf? In seashells? Cloven hooves? Most things but horses. Shoe a horse with a clove of garlic? Wind? Smell? Wind of 7-league books? Is Hal devil? Cloven toes and 7-league boots? Mermaids in boots?" As Sophie wrote this, Michael asked equally desperately, "Could the wind be some sort of pulley? An honest man being hanged? That's black magic, though. Let's have some... Ow, ouch! I whacked my phone. I whacked my phone almost off the table. Oops. Oops. "Let's have supper," said Sophie. They ate bread and cheese, still staring into the distance. At last Sophie said, Michael, for goodness sake, let's give up guessing and try doing what it says. Where's the best place to catch a shooting star? Out on the hills? Port Haven marshes are flatter, said Michael. Can we? Shooting stars go awfully fast. So can we, in 7-link boots, Sophie pointed out. Michael sprang up, full of relief and delight. I think you've got it, she said, scrambling for the boots. Let's go and try. This time Sophie prudently took her stick and shawl, so it was now quite dark. Michael was turning the doorknob blue side down when two strange things happened. On the bench, the teeth of a skull started clattering, and Calcifer blazed right up the chimney. I don't want you to go, he said. We'll be back soon, Michael said soothingly. They went onto the street of Port Haven. It was a bright and balmy night. As soon as they had reached the end of the street, however, Michael remembered that Sophie had been ill that morning and began to worry about the effects of the night air on her health. Sophie told him not to be silly. She stumped gamely on along with her stick until they left the lighted windows behind, and the night became wide and damp and chilly. The marshes smelled of salt and earth. The sea glittered and softly swished to the rear. Sophie could feel, more than see, the miles and miles of flatness stretched away in front of them. What she could see were bands of low bluish mists and pale glimmers of marshy pools, over and over again, until they built into a pale line where the sky started. The sky was everywhere else, huger still. The Milky Way looked like a band of mist risen from the marshes, and the keen stars twinkled through it. Michael and Sophie stood, each with a boot ready on the ground in front of them, waiting for one of the stars to move. After about an hour, Sophie had to pretend she was not shivering for fear of worrying Michael. Half an hour later, Michael said, May is not the right time of year. August or November is best. Half an hour after that, he said in a worried way, What do we do about the mandrake root? Let's get to this part before we worry about that, Sophie said, biting her teeth together while she spoke for fear they would shatter. Some time later, Michael said, You go home, Sophie. It's my spell, after all. Sophie had her mouth open to say that this was a very good idea, when one of the stars came unstuck from the firmament and darted in a white streak down the sky. There's one, Sophie shrieked instead. Michael thumped his foot into his boot and was off. Sophie braced herself with her stick and was off the second later. Zip! Squash! Down far out of the marshes with the mist and emptiness and dull glimmering pools in all directions. Sophie stabbed her stick into the ground and managed to stand still. Michael's boot was a dark blot, just standing beside her. Michael himself was a splashy sound of madly running feet somewhere ahead. And there was the falling star. Sophie could see it, a little white descending flame shape a few yards beyond the dark movement that were Michael. The bright shape was coming down slowly now, and it looked as if Michael might catch it. Sophie dragged her shoe out of the boot. Come on, stick, she crowed. Get me there. As she set off at the top of hobble, leaping across tussocks and staggering through pools, her eyes on that little white light. By the time she caught up, Michael was stalking the star with soft steps, both arms to catch it. Sophie could see him outlined against the star's light. The star was drifting level with Michael's hands and only a step or so beyond. It was looking back at him nervously. How odd, Sophie thought. It was made of light, and it lit up a white ring of grass and reeds and black pools around Michael. It had big, anxious eyes peering backwards at Michael, and a small, pointed face. Sophie's arrival frightened it. It gave an erratic swoop and cried out in a shrill, crackling voice, What is it? What do you want? Sophie tried to say to Michael, Do stop, it's terrified, but she had no breath left to speak with. I really want to catch you, Michael explained. I won't hurt you. No, the star crackled desperately. That's wrong. I'm supposed to die. But I could save you if you let me catch you, Michael told it gently. No, cried the star. I'd rather die. It dived away from Michael's fingers. Michael plunged for it, but it was too quick for him. It swooped for the nearest marsh pool, and the black water leaped into a blaze of whiteness for just an instant. Then there was a small dying sizzle. When Sophie hobbled over, Michael was standing watching the last light fade out of the little round lump under the dark water. That was sad, said Sophie. Michael sighed. Yeah, my heart sort of went out to it. Let's go home. I'm tired of this spell. took them 20 minutes to find the boots. Sophie thought it was a miracle they found them at all. You know, Michael said as they trudged dejectedly through the dark streets of Port Haven, I can tell I'll never be able to do this spell. It's too advanced for me. I shall have to ask Hal. I hate giving in, but at least I'll get some sense out of him. But at least I'll get some sense out of Hal now that this Letty Howder's given in to him. This did not cheer Sophie up at all. Chapter 10, in which Calcifer promises Sophie a hint. Hal must have come back while Sophie and Michael were out. He came out of the bathroom while Sophie was frying breakfast on Calcifer, and sat gracefully in the chair, groomed and glowing and smelling of honeysuckle. Dear Sophie, he said, always busy. You were hard at work yesterday, weren't you, in spite of my advice? Why have you made a jigsaw puzzle of my best suit? Just a friendly inquiry, you know. You jellied it the other day, said Sophie. I'm making it over. I can do that, said Hal. I thought I showed you. I can also make you a pair of 7-link boots of your own if you give me your size. Something practical and brown calf, perhaps. It's amazing the way one can take a step 10.5 miles long and still always land in a cow pat. It might have been a bull pat, said Sophie. I dare say you found mud from the marshes on them, too. A person my age needs a lot of exercise. You were even busier than I realized then, said Hal, because when I happened to tear my eyes from Letty's lovely face for an instant yesterday, I could have sworn I saw your long nose poking around the corner of the house. Mrs. Fairfax is a family friend, said Sophie. How was I to know you would be there, too? You have an instinct, Sophie, that's how, said Hal. Nothing is safe from you. If I were to court a girl who lived on an iceberg in the middle of an ocean, sooner or later, probably sooner, I'd look up to see you swooping overhead on a broomstick. In fact, by now I'd be disappointed if I didn't see you. Are you off to the iceberg today? Sophie retorted. From the look on Letty's face yesterday, there's nothing that need keep you there. You wrong me, Sophie, Hal said. He sounded deeply injured. Sophie looked suspiciously sideways. Beyond the red jewel swinging in Hal's ear, his profile looked sad and noble. Long years would pass before I leave Letty, he said. And in fact, I'm off to see the king again today. Satisfied, Mrs. Nose? Sophie was not sure she believed a word of this, though it was certainly to Kingsbury, with the doorknob red down, that Hal departed after breakfast, waving Michael aside when Michael tried to consult him about the perplexing spell. Michael, since he had nothing to do, left too. He said he might as well go to Cesari's. Sophie was left alone. She still did not truly believe what Hal had said about Letty, but she had been wrong about him before, and she had only Michael and Calcifer's word for Hal's behavior after all. She collected up all the little square blue triangles of cloth and began guiltily sewing them back into the silver fishing net in which was all that was left of the suit. When someone knocked at the door, she started violently, thinking it was the Scarecrow again. Port Haven door! Calcifer said, flicking a purple grin at her. That should be all right, then. Sophie hobbled over and opened it, blew down. There was a cart horse outside. A young fellow of 50 who was leading it wondered if Mrs. Witch had something which might stop it casting shoes all the time. I see, said Sophie. She hobbled over to the grate. What shall I do? She whispered. Yellow powder, 4th jar along the 2nd shelf, Calcifer whispered back. Those spells are mostly belief. Don't look uncertain when you give it to them. So Sophie poured the yellow powder into a square of paper as she'd seen Michael do, twisted it smartly, and hobbled to the door with it. There you are, my boy, she said. That'll stick the shoes on harder than any 100 nails. You hear me, Horace? You won't need a smith for the next year. That'll be a penny, thank you. It was quite a busy day. Sophie had to put down her sewing and sell, with Calcifer's help, a spell to unblock drains, another to fetch goats, and something to make good beer. The only one that gave her any trouble was the customer who pounded on the door in Kingsbury. Sophie opened it, read down to find a richly dressed boy, not much older than Michael, white-faced and sweating, wringing his hands on the doorstep. Madam Sorceress, for pity's sake, he said. I have to fight a duel at dawn tomorrow. Give me something that'll make sure I win. I will pay any sum you ask. Sophie looked over her shoulder at Calcifer, and Calcifer made faces back, meaning there was no such thing ready-made. That wouldn't be all right at all, Sophie told the boy severely. Besides, dueling is wrong. Then just give me something that at least lets me have a fair chance, the lad said desperately. Sophie looked at him. He was very undersized and clearly in great state of fear. He had that hopeless look a person who always loses at everything. I'll see what I can do, Sophie said. She hobbled over to the shelves and scanned the jars. The red one labeled Cayenne looked the most likely. Sophie poured a generous heap of it on a square of paper. She stood the human skull beside it. Because you must know more about this than I do, she muttered at it. The young man was leaning anxiously around the door to watch. As Sophie took up a knife and made what she hoped would look like linguistic passes over a heap of pepper. You are to make it a fair fight, she mumbled. A fair fight, understand? She screwed the paper up and hobbled to the door with it. Throw this in the air when the duel starts, she told the undersized young man, and it'll give you the same chance as the other man. After that, whether you win or not depends on you. The undersized young man was so grateful that he tried to give her a gold piece. Sophie refused to take it, so he gave her a 2-penny bit instead and went away whistling happily. I feel a fraud, Sophie said as she stowed the money under the hearthstone, but I would like to be there for that fight. So would I, cackled Calcifer. When are you going to release me so that I can go and see things like that? When I've got the hint about this contract, said Sophie. You might get one later today, said Calcifer. Michael breathed in towards the end of the afternoon. He took an anxious look around to make sure Howl had not come home first, and went to the bench, where he got things out to make it look as if he had been busy, singing cheerfully while he did. I envy you being able to walk all that way so easily, Sophie said, sewing a blue triangle to a silver braid. How is my niece? Michael gladly left the workbench and sat on the stool by the hearth to tell her about his day. Then he asked about Sophie's. The result was that when Hal shouldered the door open with his arms full of parcels, Michael was not even looking busy. He was rolling around on the stool laughing at the duel spell. Hal backed into the door to shut it and leaned there in a tragic attitude. Look at you all, he said. Ruin stares me in the face. I slave all day for you all, and not one of you, even Calcifer, could spare time to say hello. Michael sprang guiltily, and Calcifer said, I never do say hello. Is something wrong? Asked Sophie. That's better, said Hal. Some of you are pretending to notice me at last. How kind of you to ask, Sophie. Yes, something is wrong. The king has asked me to officially to find his brother for him, with a strong hint that destroying the Witch of the Waste would come in handy too, and you all sit there and laugh. By now it was clear that Hal was in a mood to produce green slime at any second. Sophie hurriedly put her sewing away. I'll make some hot buttered toast, she said. Is that all you can do in the face of tragedy? Hal asked. Make toast! No, don't get up. I've treasured here laden with stuff for you, so the least you can do is show a polite interest. Here. He tipped a shower of parcels into Sophie's lap and handed another to Michael. Mystified, Sophie unwrapped the things. Several pairs of silk stockings, 2 parcels of the finest cambric petticoats, with flounces, lace, and satin insets, a pair of elastic-sided boots, and dove-gray suede, a lace shawl, and a dress of gray watered silk trimmed with lace that matched the shawl. Sophie took one professional look at each and gasped. The lace alone was worth a fortune. She stroked the silk of the dress, awed. Michael unwrapped a handsome new velvet suit. You must have spent every bit of money that was in the silk purse, he said ungratefully. I don't need this. You're the one who needs a new suit. Hal hooked his boot into what remained of the blue and silver suit and held it up ruefully. Sophie had been working hard, but it was still a more whole than suit. How selfless I am, he said. But I can't send you and Sophie to blacken my name to the king in rags. The king would think I didn't look after my old mother properly. Well, Sophie, are the boots the right size? Sophie looked up from her odd stroking. Are you being kind, she said, or cowardly? Thank you very much, and no, I won't. What ingratitude, Hal exclaimed, spreading out both arms. Let's have green slime again, after which I shall be forced to move the castle 1,000 miles away and never see my lovely Letty again. Michael looked at Sophie imploringly. Sophie glowered. She saw well enough that the happiness of both her sisters depended on her agreeing to see the king, with green slime in reserve. You haven't asked me to do anything yet, she said. You've just said I'm going to. Hal smiled. And you are going to, aren't you? All right. When do you want me to go? Sophie said. Tomorrow afternoon, said Hal. Michael can go as your footman. The king's expecting you. He sat on the stool and began explaining very clearly and somberly just what Sophie was to say. There was no trace of the green slime mood now. And now that there was no trace of the green slime mood, now that things were going Hal's way, Sophie noticed. She wanted to slap him. I want you to do a very delicate job, Hal explained, so that the king will go on giving me work like the transport spells, but not trust me with anything like finding his brother. You must tell him how I've angered the Witch of the Waste and explain what a good son I am to you. But I want you to do it in such a way that he'll understand that I'm really quite useless. Hal explained in great detail. Sophie clasped her hands around the parcels and tried to take it all in, though she could not help thinking, if I was the king, I wouldn't understand a word of what this old woman was driving at. Michael, meanwhile, was hovering at Hal's elbow, trying to ask him about the perplexing spell. Hal kept thinking of new, delicate details to tell the king and waving Michael away. Not now, Michael. And it occurred to me, Sophie, that you might want some practice in order not to find the palace overwhelming. We don't want you coming over queer in the middle of the interview. Not yet, Michael. Grander than the king. So you'll be quite used to that kind of thing by the time you get to the palace. By this time, Sophie was wishing she had never agreed. She was heartily relieved when Hal at last turned to Michael. Right, Michael, your turn now. What is it? Michael whipped the shiny gray paper and explained in an unhappy rush how impossible the spell seemed to do. Hal seemed faintly astonished to hear this, but he took the paper, saying, Now, where was your problem? And spread it out. He stared at it. One of his eyebrows shot up. I tried it as a puzzle, and then I tried doing as it says, said Michael explained, but Sophie and I couldn't catch a falling star. Great gods above! Hal exclaimed. He started to laugh, but bit his lips to stop himself. But Michael, this isn't the spell I left you. Where did you find it? On the bench, and that heap of things Sophie piled around the skull, said Michael. I thought it was the only new spell there, so I thought. Hal leaped up and sorted among the things on the bench. Sophie strikes again, he said. Things skidded right and left as he searched. I might have known. No, the proper spell's not here. He tapped the skull thoughtfully on its brown shiny dome. You're doing, friend? I have a notion you come from there. I'm sure the Qatar does. Sophie, dear. What? Said Sophie. Busy old fool, unruly Sophie, said Hal. Am I right in thinking that you turned my doorknob black side down and stuck your long nose out through it? Just a finger, said Sophie with dignity. But you opened the door, said Hal, and the thing Michael thinks is a spell must have gone through. Didn't it occur to either of you that it doesn't look like spells usually do? Spells often look peculiar, Michael said. What is it, really? Hal gave a snort of laughter. Decide what this is about, write a second verse. Oh, Lord, he said and ran for the stairs. I'll show you, he called as his feet pounded up them. I think we wasted our time rushing around the marshes last night, Sophie said. Michael nodded gloomily. Sophie could see he was feeling a fool. It was my fault, she said. I opened the door. What was outside? Michael asked with great interest. But Hal came charging downstairs just then. I haven't got that book after all, he said. Oh! Lemmy! No! Bad Lemmy! I'm so sorry about that. Lemmy was making noises again. I think he wants my attention. Silly eldritch being. Such a silly eldritch being. Enjoying? Hi, Kay. Hello, Kay. Hello, Enjoying. Hi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Enjoying, right? Welcome. Thank you for being here. Welcome. We're reading Howl's Moving Castle. I hope you're enjoying the story. Thank you for being here. I hope you're having a lovely day. And thank you for being here to enjoy the story. Excuse me. Hal came charging downstairs just then. I haven't got that book after all, he said. He seemed upset now. Michael, did I hear you say you went out and tried to catch a shooting star? Yes, but it was scared stiff and fell in a pool. And drowned, said Michael. Thank goodness for that, said Hal. It was very sad, said Sophie. Sad, was it? Said Hal, more upset than ever. It was your idea, was it? It would be. I can just see you hopping around the marshes encouraging him. Let me tell you, that was the most stupid thing he's ever done in his life. He'd have been more than sad if he chanced to catch the thing. And you... Calcifer flickered sleepily up in the chimney. What's all the fuss about? He demanded. You caught one yourself, didn't you? Yes, and I... Hal began, turning his glass marble glare on Calcifer. But he pulled himself together and turned to Michael instead. Michael, promise me you'll never try to catch one again. I promise, Michael said willingly. What's that writing if it's not a spell? Hal looked at the gray paper in his hand. It's called Song, and that's what it is, I suppose. But it's not all here, and I can't remember the rest of it. He stood in thought, as if a new idea had struck him, one which obviously worried him. I think the next verse was important, he said. I better take it back and see. He went to the door and turned the knob black side down. Then he paused. He looked around at Michael and Sophie, who were naturally enough both staring at the knob. All right, he said. I know Sophie will squirm through somehow if I leave her behind, and that's not fair to Michael. Come along, both of you. I've got you where I can keep an eye on you. He opened the door on the nothingness and walked into it. Michael fell over the stool at his rush to follow. Sophie shed parcels right and left into the hearth as she sprang up too. Don't let any sparks get on those, she said hurriedly to Calcifer. If you promise to tell me what's out there, said Calcifer. You had your hint, by the way. Did I? Said Sophie. She was in too much of a hurry to attend. Chapter 11, in which Hal goes into a strange country in search of a spell. I'm glad that you're here too, enjoying. Thank you for being here. The nothingness was only an inch thick after all. Beyond it, in a grey, drizzling evening, was a cement path down to a garden gate. Hal and Michael were waiting at the gate. Beyond that was a flat, hard-looking road lined with houses on both sides. Sophie looked back at where she had come from, shivering rather in the drizzle, and found the castle had become a house of yellow brick with large windows. Like all the other houses, it was square and new, with a front door of wobbly glass. No one seemed to be among the houses. That may be due to the drizzle, but Sophie had a feeling that it was really because, despite there being so many houses, this was somewhere at the edge of town. When you've quite finished nosing, Hal called. His grey and scarlet finery was all misted with drizzle. He was dangling a bunch of strange keys, most of which were flat and yellow, and seemed to match the houses. When Sophie came down the path, he said, We need to be dressed in keeping with this place. His finery blurred, as if the drizzle around him had suddenly become a fog. When it came into focus again, it was still scarlet and grey, but quite a different shape. The dangling sleeves had gone, and the whole outfit was baggier. It looked worn and shabby. Michael's jacket had become a waist-length padded thing. He lifted his foot with a canvas shoe on it, and stared at the tight blue things encasing his legs. I can hardly bend my knee, he said. You'll get used to it, said Hal. Come on, Sophie. To Sophie's surprise, Hal led the way back up the garden path, towards the yellow house. The back of his baggy jacket, she saw, had the mysterious words on it, Welsh Rugby. Michael followed Hal, walking in a kind of tight strut because of these things on his legs. Sophie looked down herself and saw twice as much skinny legs showing above her knobbly shoes. Otherwise, not much about her has changed. Hal unlocked the wavy glass door with one of his keys. It had a wooden notice hanging beside on the chains. Rivendell, Sophie read, as Hal pushed her into a neat, shiny hall space. There seemed to be people in the house. Loud voices were coming from behind the nearest door. When Hal opened that door, Sophie realized that the voices were coming from magic-colored pictures moving in the front of a big square box. "Howell!" exclaimed the woman who was sitting there knitting. She put down her knitting, looking a little annoyed, but before she could get up, a small girl who had been watching the magic picture very seriously with her chin in her hands, leaped up and flung herself at Hal. "Uncle Howell!" she screamed, and jumped halfway up Hal with her legs wrapped around him. "Marty!" Hal bawled and replied. "How are you, Caridad? Been a good girl, then?" Then he and the little girl broke into a foreign language then, fast and loud. Sophie could see they were very special to one another. She wondered about the language. It sounded the same as Calcifer's silly saucepan song, but it was hard to be sure. In bursts between foreign chatter, Hal managed to say, as if he were a ventriloquist, "This is my niece Mari, and my sister Megan Perry. Megan, this is Michael Fisher, and Sophie, Hatter, she said. Megan shook hands with both of them in a restrained, disapproving way. She was older than Hal, but quite like him, with the same long, angular face, but her eyes were blue and full of anxieties, and her hair was darkish. "Quiet now, Mari," she said in a voice that cut through the foreign chatter. "Howell, are you staying long?" "Just dropped in for a moment," Hal said, lowering Mari to the floor. "Garth isn't here yet," Megan said in a meaning sort of way. "What a pity. We can't stay," Hal said, smiling a warm, false smile. "I just thought I'd introduce you to my friends here, and I want to ask you something that may sound silly. Has Neil by any chance lost a piece of English homework lately?" "Funny you should say that," Megan exclaimed, "looking everywhere for he was last Thursday. He got this new English teacher, see, and she's very strict. Doesn't just worry about spelling either. Puts the fear of God into them about getting their work in on time. Doesn't do Neil any harm, the lazy little devil. So he's here. So here he is on Thursday, hunting low and high, and all I could find is this funny old piece of writing." "Ah," said Hal. What did he do with that writing?" "I told him to hand it into this Miss Angorian of his," Megan said. "Might sure he tried for once." "And did he?" asked Hal. "I don't know. Better ask Neil. He's up in the front bedroom with that machine of his," said Megan. "But you won't get a word of sense out of him." "Come on," Hal said to Michael and Sophie, who were both staring around the shiny brown and orange room. He took Mari's hand and led them out of the room and up the stairs. Even those had a carpet, a pink and green one. So the procession led by Hal made hardly any noise as it went along the pink and green passage upstairs and into a room with a blue and yellow carpet. But Sophie was not sure the two boys crouched over the various magic boxes on the big table they had by the window would have looked up even for an army with a brass band. The main magic box had a glass front like the one downstairs, but it seemed to be showing writing and diagrams more than pictures. All the boxes grew on long, floppy white stalks that appeared to be rooted into the wall at one side of the room. "Neil," said Hal. "Don't interrupt," one of the boys said. "He'll lose his life." Seeing it was a matter of life and death, Sophie and Michael backed towards the door, but Hal, quite unperturbed at killing his nephew, strode over to the wall and pulled the boxes up by the roots. The picture on the box vanished. Both boys said words which Sophie did not think even Martha knew. The second boy spun around, shouting, "Mari, I'll get you for that." "It wasn't me this time, so." "Nit," Mari shouted back. Neil whirled further around and stared accusingly at Hal. "How do, Neil?" said Hal pleasantly. "Who is he?" the other boy asked. "My no-good uncle," Neil said. He glowered at Hal. He was dark, with thick eyebrows, and his glower was impressive. "What do you want? Put that plug back in." "There's a welcome in the valleys," said Hal. "I'll put it back in when I've asked you something and you've answered." Neil sighed. "Uncle Howell, I'm in the middle of a computer game." "A new one?" asked Hal. Both the boys looked discontented. "No, it's the one I had for Christmas," Neil said. "You ought to know the way they go on about wasting time and money on useless things. They won't give me another until my birthday." "Then that's easy," said Hal. "You won't mind stopping if you've done it before, and I'll bribe you with a new one." "Really?" both boys said eagerly, and Neil added, "Can you make another one of those that nobody else has got?" "Yes, but just take a look at this first and tell me what it is." Hal said, and held the shiny gray paper out in front of Neil. Both boys looked at it. Neil said, "It's a poem," in the way most people say it's a dead rat. "It's the one Miss Angorian sent for last week's homework," said the other boy. "I remember Wind and Finned. It's about submarines." While Sophie and Michael blinked at this new theory, wondering how they had missed it, Neil exclaimed, "Hey, it's my long-lost homework! Where did you find it? Was that funny writing that turned up yours? Miss Angorian said it was interesting. Lucky for me, and she took it home with her." "Thank you," said Hal. Where does she live?" "That flat over Mrs. Phelps' tea shop, Cantrip Road," said Neil. "When will you give me the new tape?" "When you remember how the rest of the poem goes," said Hal. "That's not fair," said Neil. "I can't even remember that bit that was written down. That's just playing with a person's feelings." He stopped when Hal laughed, felt in one of the baggy pockets, and handed him a flat packet. "Thanks," said Neil devoutly, and without more ado he whirled around to his magic boxes. Hal planted the bundle of roots back into the wall, grinning, and beckoned Michael and Sophie out of the room. Both boys began a flurry of mysterious activity, into which Mari somehow squeezed herself, watching with her thumb in her mouth. Hal hurried away to the pink and green stairs, but Michael and Sophie both hung about the nearest door of the room, wondering what the whole thing was about. Inside, Neil was reading aloud. "You are in an enchanted castle with 4 doors. Each door opens onto a different dimension. In Dimension 1, the castle is moving constantly and may arrive at a hazard at any time." Sophie wondered at the familiarity of this as she hobbled down to the stairs. She found Michael standing halfway down, looking embarrassed. Hal was at the foot of the stairs having an argument with his sister. "What do you mean you've sold all my books?" she heard Hal saying. "I needed one of them particularly. They weren't yours to sell." "Don't keep interrupting," Megan answered in a low, ferocious voice. "Listen now. I've told you before I am not a storehouse for your property. You're a disgrace to me and Gareth, lounging about in those clothes instead of buying a proper suit and looking respectable for once. Taking up with riffraff and layabouts. Bringing them to this house. And you're trying to bring me down to your level? You had all that education and you don't even get a decent job. You just hang around, wasting all that time at college, wasting all those sacrifices that other people made, wasting your money." Megan would have been a match for Mrs. Fairfax. Her voice went on and on. Sophie began to understand how Hal had acquired the habit of slithering out. Megan was the kind of person who made you want to back quietly out of the nearest door. Unfortunately, Hal was backed up against the stairs, and Sophie and Michael were bottled up behind him. "Never doing an honest day's work, never getting a job I could be proud of, bringing shame on me and Gareth, coming here and spoiling Mari rotten," Megan grounded on remorselessly. Sophie pushed past Michael aside and stumped downstairs, looking so stately as she could manage. "Come, Hal," she said grandly. "We must really be on our way. While we stand here, money is ticking away and your servants are probably stealing the gold plate. So nice to meet you," she said to Megan as she arrived at the foot of the stairs. "But we must rush. Hal is such a busy man." Megan gulped a bit as she stared at Sophie. Sophie gave her a stately nod and pushed Hal towards the wavy glass front door. Michael's face was bright red. Sophie saw that because Hal turned back to ask Megan, "Is my old car still in the shed, or have you sold that too?" "You've got the only set of keys," Megan answered dourly. That seemed to be the only goodbye. The front door slammed and Hal took them to a square, white building at the end of the flat back road. Hal did not say anything about Megan. He said as he unlocked a wide door in the building, "I suppose the fierce English teacher is bound to have a copy of that book." Sophie wished to forget the next bit. They rode in a carriage without horses that went at a terrifying speed, smelling and growling and shaking as it tore down some of the steepest roads Sophie had ever seen. Roads so steep that she wondered why the houses lining them did not slide into a heap at the bottom. She shut her eyes and clung to some of the pieces that had torn off the seats, and simply hoped that it would be over soon. Luckily it was. They arrived in a flatter road with the houses crammed in on both sides, besides large windows filled with white curtains, and noticed that it said "Teas closed." But despite this forbidding notice, when Hal pressed a button at a small door beside the window, Miss Angorian opened the door. They all stared at her. For a fierce schoolteacher, Miss Angorian was astoundingly young and slender and good-looking. She had sheets of blue-black hair hanging around her olive-brown, heart-shaped face and enormous dark eyes. The only thing which suggested fierceness about her was the direct and clever way those enormous eyes looked and seemed to sum them up. "I'll take a small guess that you may be Howell Jenkins," Mrs. Angorian said to Hal. She had a low, melodious voice that was nevertheless rather amused and quite sure of itself. Hal was taken aback for an instant. Then his smile snapped on. And that, Sophie thought, was goodbye to the pleasant dreams of Letty and Mrs. Fairfax, for Miss Angorian was exactly the kind of lady someone like Hal could be trusted to fall in love with on the spot. And not only Hal, Michael was staring admiringly too. And though the houses around were apparently deserted, Sophie had no doubt that they were full of people who knew both Hal and Miss Angorian and were watching with interest to see what would happen. She could feel their invisible eyes. Mark Chipping was like that too. "And you must be Miss Angorian," said Hal. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I made a stupid mistake last week and carried off my nephew's English homework instead of a rather important paper I had with me. I gather Neil gave it to you as proof that he wasn't shirking." "He did," said Miss Angorian. "You better come in and collect it." Sophie was sure the invisible eyes in all the houses goggled and the invisible necks craned as Hal and Michael and she trooped through Mrs. Angorian's door and up a flight of stairs to Mrs. Angorian's tiny, severe living room. Miss Angorian said considerately to Sophie, "Won't you sit down?" Sophie was still shaking from that horseless carriage. She sat down gladly on one of the 2 chairs. It was not very comfortable. Miss Angorian's room was not designed for comfort but for study. Though many of the things in it were strange, Sophie understood the walls of books, and the piles of paper on the table, and the folders stacked on the floor. She sat and watched Michael staring sheepishly and Hal turning on his charm. "How is it that you've come to know who I am?" Hal said beguilingly. "You seem to have caused a lot of gossip in this town," Miss Angorian said, busy sorting through papers on the desk. "And what have those people who gossip told you?" Hal asked. He leaned languishingly on the end of the table and tried to catch Miss Angorian's eye. "That you disappear and turn up rather unpredictably for one," Miss Angorian said. "And what else?" Hal followed Miss Angorian's movement with such a look that Sophie knew Letty's only chance was for Miss Angorian to fall instantly in love with Hal too. But Miss Angorian was not that kind of lady. She said, "Many other things, few of them to your credit," and caused Michael to blush by looking at him, and then at Sophie in a way that suggested that these things were not fit for their ears. She held a yellowish, wavy-edged paper out to Hal. Here it is," she said severely. "Do you know what it is?" "Of course," said Hal. "Then please tell me," said Miss Angorian. Hal took the paper. With a bit of a scuffle as he tried to take Miss Angorian's hand with it. Miss Angorian won the scuffle and put her hands behind her back. Hal smiled meltingly and passed the paper to Michael. "You tell her," he said. Michael's blushing face lit up as soon as he looked at it. "It's the spell! Oh, I can do this one. It's enlargement, isn't it?" "That's what I thought," Miss Angorian said rather accusingly. "I'd like to know what you were doing with such a thing." "Miss Angorian," said Hal, "if you have heard all those things about me, you must know I wrote my doctoral thesis on charms and spells. You look as if you suspect me of working black magic. I assure you I never worked any kind of spell in my life." Sophie could not stop herself from making a small snort at that blatant lie. "With my hand on my heart," Hal added, giving Sophie an irritated frown. "The spell's for study purposes only. It's very old and rare. That's why I wanted it back." "Well, you have it back," Miss Angorian said briskly. "Before you go, would you mind giving me my homework sheet in return? Photocopies cost money." Hal brought out the gray paper willingly and held it out just out of reach. "This poem now," he said. "It's been bothering me. Silly, really. But I can't remember the rest of it. By Walter Raleigh, isn't it?" Miss Angorian gave him a withering look. "Certainly not. It's by John Donne, and is very well known indeed. I have the book with it here, if you want to refresh your memory." "Please," said Hal. And from the way his eyes followed Miss Angorian as she went to her wall of books, Sophie realized that this was the real reason why Hal had come to this strange land where his family lived. But Hal was not above killing 2 birds with 1 stone. "Miss Angorian," he said pleadingly, following her contours as she stretched for the book. Would you consider coming out for some supper with me tonight? Miss Angorian turned around the large book in her hands, looking more severe than ever. I would not, she said. Mr. Jenkins, I don't know what you have heard about me, but you must have heard that I'm still considering myself engaged to Ben Sullivan. Never heard of him, said Howl. My fiancé, said Mrs. Angorian. He disappeared some years back. Now, do you wish me to read this poem to you? Do that, he said, quite unrepentant. You have such a lovely voice. Then I'll start with the second verse, Mrs. Angorian said. Since you have the first verse there in your hand. I need some water, excuse me. She read very well, not only melodiously, but in a way that made the second verse fit the rhyme of the first, in which Sophie's opinion it did not do at all. If thou be'st born to strange sights, things invisible to see, ride 10,000 days and nights till age snow-white hairs on thee, thou, when thou returnest, wilt tell me all strange and wonders that befell thee, and swear nowhere lives a woman true and fair. If thou... Hal had gone terribly white. Sophie could see sweat standing on his face. Thank you, he said. Stop there. I won't trouble you for the rest. Even the good woman is untrue in the last verse, isn't she? I remember now. Silly me, John Donne, of course. Miss Angorian lowered the book and stared at him. He forced up a smile. We must be going now. Surely you won't change your mind about supper. I will not, said Miss Angorian. Are you quite well, Mr. Jenkins? In the pink, said Howl, and he hustled Michael and Sophie away down the stairs and into the horrible horseless carriage. The invisible watchers in the house must have thought Miss Angorian was chasing them with a saber, if they judged from the speed in which Howl packed them in and drove off. What's the matter? Michael asked as the carriage went roaring and grinding uphill again, and Sophie clung to the bits of seat for dear life. Hal pretended not to hear, so Michael waited until Hal was locking it into its shed and asked again. Oh, nothing, Hal said airily, leading the way back to the yellow house called Rivendell. The Witch of the Waste has caught up with me with her curse, that's all. Bound to happen sooner or later. He seemed to be calculating or doing sums in his head while opening the garden gate. 10,000, Sophie heard him murmur. That brings it to about Midsummer's Day. What is brought to Midsummer's Day? Asked Sophie. The time I will be 10,000 days old, Hal said. And that, Mrs. knows, he said, swinging into the garden of Rivendell, is the day I shall have to go back to the Witch of the Waste. Sophie and Michael hung back on the path, staring at Howl's back so mysteriously labeled Welsh Rugby. If I keep clear of mermaids, they heard him murmured, and don't touch a mandrake root. Michael called out, Do we have to go back in that house? And Sophie called, What will the witch do? I shudder to think, Hal said. And you don't have to go back in, Michael. He opened the wavy glass door. Inside was the familiar room of the castle. Calcifer's sleepy blue flames were coloring the walls faintly blue-green in the dusk. Hal flung back his long sleeves and gave Calcifer a log. She's caught up, old Blueface, he said. I know, Calcifer said. I felt it take. Oh my gosh. My throat's starting to get a little bit sore. Let's see. How long have we been going? Oh, I think I'm going to cut it a little early this time around because my throat is getting a little bit sore. While I have recovered from my hangover from yesterday, I haven't, my voice box hasn't fully recovered. So I think I'm going to stop it early for today. I'm glad to have been able to read this to you guys today. This was quite fun. We will be able to continue this next week, of course. And I'm excited to be able to continue this. This is one of my favorite stories. And I'm hoping that you guys are enjoying it too. Excuse me. Tomorrow I will not be streaming. However, on Thursday, we will be concluding our journey in Undertale. We will be going for the pacifist ending And so I will hope to see you guys there. It'll be our last Undertale video. How exciting! Well, at least the last one of the pacifist route. Ejuine, thank you for being here. I read stories every Tuesday. I stream. Since you're new here, let me let you know. I stream 4 days out of the week. On Mondays, I usually do a sit down and chat with everybody in stream. Tuesdays are usually my reading streams. I do believe that this is the 4th book I've been reading on my streams at this point. I do have playlists on my channel if you want to listen to any of the story reading that I have done. I've done quite a few already, and I hope you can enjoy them on your time off. My VODs are always available if you want to catch up on any gameplay or any story reading that you might want to, check out. So please, feel free to check those out. Thursday, I don't stream on Wednesdays. Wednesdays are a no stream day. Thursday, I'll be finishing up Undertale. So that'll be exciting. And then Friday, we'll be doing a drawing stream. So I hope that you can come join us for those too. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for everybody who has come and stopped by to say hi. I hope that you enjoy this. And I'm so thankful that you could be here today. If you want to, stay up to date with on any of my streams, please feel free to subscribe. You can become a part of our Floofle family. I always love to welcome new people to our Floofle family. Yes. If you want to make them more, please subscribe. You can get the notification to whenever I stream. That way you can keep up to date. I always love having new people come into our streams. It's always so much fun. I love getting to know my chat I love talking to my chat as well. So, with the exception of the reading streams, I love talking to my chat. I always love interacting with my chat. So please don't be afraid to stop by and say hello and converse with me. I always enjoy it. And I guess I'll be seeing you all on Wednesday. I mean, not Wednesday. I'm not streaming tomorrow. I'll be seeing you all on Thursday for our Undertale stream. So until then, I hope everyone has a wonderful Tuesday. Have a wonderful day, morning, evening, nighttime, whatever time zone that you live in. And as always, remember, hug your friends. Tell somebody you love them. And be a force for good in the world, because goodness knows the world always needs a little more good and kindness. I've subbed. Thank you, Ejuine. Thank you for subbing. I'm so happy to welcome you to our Floofle family. You're so lovely. Thank you for being here. I will give you all the extra kisses. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Alright, everybody. I will see you guys on Thursday for Undertale. Take care. Have a happy Tuesday and a lovely Wednesday. And I'll be seeing you guys soon. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I love you all so very, very much, and I'll be seeing you next time. Bye!